Overrated. Immediately, when I say that, I guarantee you have one or two board games that come to your mind right away. Why do people like that game? Why are they even interested in that? How did that get rated so high? Let's talk about that. I looked at the BoardGameGeek top 200 and I said, these 5 games I think are overrated. Let me tell you why I think they're overrated, but also why I like them anyway. Let's do this. Hey, it's Chris, Legion of Games. You may think, you know what? He's going to throw Wingspan on there. He's going to throw Scythe on there. No, I'm not taking the easy way out. I'm taking a different approach to this. I'm going to give you some nuance that is more than just the obvious name draws. But I'm going to give you some of the obvious name draws, and I'm going to give you a different view on it than you might be used to. So, without further ado, let's do it. Number 1. And I mean, speaking of number 1, right? Number one across the board, Gloomhaven. It's overrated. It is. It is. It's impossible to get through for the most part. It's impossible to get to the table without significant setup, downtime, play time in terms of repeated play. None of that is new, right? Chris, you just said you were going to do something completely different. Why is it overrated? It is a great game. Original backer here on the very first Kickstarter with the standee version. Yeah, standees. I went there. I stay true to my brand, right? Why? So why is it overrated to me? Not because of the obvious reason of those things I just mentioned, but because you have little brother, Jaws of the Lion, lower ranked. Because I would argue, of the two, this one doesn't have nearly the scope, but this has the broad mass market appeal to an extent the original is never going to have. It handholds you in a good way. The book of how to introduce things, both literally and figuratively, was written with this version. And it's about a third of the price. Both of those things make the other one overrated, as weird as that sounds. You are seeing other games not copy Gloomhaven now, although they are, to a much lesser extent. You are seeing games, even like Tidal Blades 2, stand on the shoulders of not Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion. And that's why I would say it's overrated, because I think both Jaws of the Lion and, to a lesser extent, Frosthaven will be superior products in the end. And that is, in a nutshell, why it's overrated. Not because people don't like it, not because it has diceless combat that people don't like, or because the campaign is too sprawling, or the missions are too repetitive, or the battles aren't, different enough, whatever. It's because the successors, the first one, should and has surpassed it, in my opinion, and the sequel of grand scope should do the same. That's why it's number 1 across the board. So what's number 2? Number 2, again, is going to be slightly obvious, slightly different. Nemesis. Did you know Nemesis is the 17th ranked game overall? If you would have asked me before I did this list where Nemesis would be, I would have said, 50, 70 maybe. 17? A rose by any other name would still smell as sweet. But does that actually stay true with Nemesis from Awakened Realms if this wasn't so closely tied to the beloved IP that this is a rebranding of by a different name? Aliens. If the nostalgia, if the tie-in wasn't there, would you feel as strongly? Because the mechanics, again, people feel somewhat divided. The thematic experience is great, amazing, fan-freaking-tastic. But is it the 17th best game? Is it the 9th best thematic game out there, 17th overall? We're getting a little bit tricky now. We're splitting hairs in terms of what you think. Because the other argument that has to be said against this is availability. BoardGameGeek doesn't take that into account. BoardGameGeek rankings don't take price into account. They don't take game length into account. They don't take accessibility into account. It is a niche within a niche within a niche for these rankings. And because of that, this one gets overvalued. Not because it's a bad game, not because I'll argue later on another video that Nemesis Lockdown is a superior product. I think this one, more so than anything else on this list, is overrated because of the hotness factor, because of the hype train, because of the recency bias. This one is by far, in a way, one of the biggest recency bias games on the list, period, for me. And I say that, again, as a fan of the game, a big fan of the game. I'm staring at Lockdown behind the camera here. I'm not going to argue with you, Space Kitty, that it isn't good. No. People love it. But is it that highly sought after? In terms of price point, in terms of accessibility, in terms of ease to play, especially with individual play sessions spaced out? No. And I think those three things matter to me more than just how good a game is, because you can't separate those out from how good a game is. You just can't, Space Kitty. You can make another argument along the same lines that more is not necessarily better, because the routine recommendations when people ask about this game, hey, what should I get for this game? It's not like, wow, everything is awesome, right? You see people routinely saying, yeah, just get the base game. I think it'd be fine. It's probably best with just the base game. Number 2. Number 3, we went down further on the list. This one is going to be slightly different as well. Azul. I am a huge fan of Azul. I am a huge fan of abstracts if you watch this channel. Azul is one of the most aesthetically pleasing abstract games to come out in the last half decade, as well as accessibility in order to teach it to other people, giving you also access to the higher player count, which a lot of abstracts don't do nearly as well. It is as mean as you want to make it, and it has spawned off now 3 generations of other Azuls, with, I'm sure, several more still to come. But let me tell you a little bit of a secret about my collection. I have owned all 3 of the 4 Azuls that have been out until the upcoming Queen's Pavilion. And I'll tell you this right now, none of the Azuls are still in my collection. Why is that? When I think of a game like this, when I think of the abstracts that I like to play, when I think of games that give me the excitement factor, the whoa, the light bulb moment, this game doesn't have it for me. This is not a pure abstract game. This is close to a purely abstract game. It's close, because you don't have control over what other people can potentially force you to do later on in the game. There's not perfect information in that sense, where sometimes you just have to take something and you have no choice. That's, again, splitting hairs, but that's how I feel. It's one of those games I feel like where finally, once you get to a building up point in your, not really engine, but you know what I'm talking about in terms of engine building, you want to run that engine. You want to get that tile in the place that's going to combo all of those points, whether it's regular or Summer Pavilion or any of these flavors, and then the game ends. And it leaves me feeling a little bit anticlimactic in terms of the scoring and the mechanisms in that sense. Again, beautifully elegant. I will not turn it down, but I also do not think in terms of the pantheons of abstracts, especially if you are going to play an abstract at a 2-player count, that this is nearly in the top 10 of the perfect information abstract games out there. Half of the GIP series, Hive, Talk, all of those should be higher than this, without any second thoughts, questions, or hesitations. Is it a good game? Yeah, absolutely. It's doing amazing things for that side of the hobby that many things in that list, short-wise, have been unable to do. But at the same time, I still don't think it's as good overall in that sense as it's made out to be. It's a great game to get people interested and to get them more interested. But it's not a great, great, great game. as its rankings may indicate otherwise. That's number 3. Number 4, we're going to go somewhere else with this one. Again, I love this game. I have a copy of it. I am going to be picking up the second one whenever I so choose. However, as great as this game is, as basically introducing cooperative trick-taking to the masses, this game is ranked 46th overall right now. 4th best family game. I would argue, especially on the family side of things, this is not as compatible from the family side. This is a game for a family of gamers. This is not a pick up and play as a family who has not played games, though. And that's how I view the family rankings on BoardGameGeek, right? You try and introduce this to people, especially people that are not used to trick-taking, especially even people that are used to competitive trick-taking, and it throws them for a loop for a while. It does. The strategy is nuanced. It's more delicate. It's a little bit more difficult. Do they pick it up and does it really work? Absolutely. I love it. The other problem along those lines, I feel like it's best at 4 and 5, which limits it sometimes in the family situations for me. I need to have that higher player count. It just doesn't quite have the tension or the dynamic that I'm looking for, especially at the 2-player count. Is it a keeper in my collection? Absolutely. Do I like bringing it to family gatherings? Yeah, but I play it with other gamers, not random family members that just decide to play a game with me, right? I have a whole different section of games that I would consider for something like that. Because this also, with a little bit of different strategy, and can cause some confusion, and it can potentially be a turnoff if you don't quite understand what's going on right away as a new person into this hobby. And that's not my goal with a game that I'm using to introduce people to. Again, fabulous, fan-freaking-tastic game. But as high as it is, no thank you. No thank you. Top 100? Sure. Top 50? There you go. That's number 4. Number 5. Again, a game I still have in my collection. One of my first probably half dozen games as a hobby board gamer, if you will. I remember after this came out, I actually bought this at Barnes & Noble because it was hard to find after it came out from Plaid Hat, and I was taken away by it. I'd never played anything like this, anything akin to this, and it just was unveiling of the rest of the hobby to me in a way. But some of the mechanics, the event deck, essentially, the crossroads deck, if you will, of playing a card every single turn that you have very little control over, the fact that you can get exposure, frostbite, zombie killed on any die roll moving between places, even in the very first turn of the very first game of the first round. The fact that the decks between the locations do not necessarily give you anything close to what you need, or are so skewed sometimes that you get exactly what you need. In combination with it's a semi-co-op. Semi-co-op is just killer on the ears. This is probably the closest thing besides like maybe Battlestar that does semi-co-op okay. But transparency, cards on the table here. I don't play semi-co-op. I just get rid of the trader mechanic altogether. I just don't think it's a good facilitator at the table. It creates too much tension, especially if you're introducing this one as a next step up from people who aren't as experienced, because it works like a great thematic experience. People, especially when this came out, were not familiar with board games, but they were familiar with zombies. They were familiar with The Walking Dead. And so you compare it to The Walking Dead, and it was a great way to get people super interested into things in the first place. And for that, I can't thank it enough. And I can't imagine not having played this, but at the same time, I don't think it holds up quite as well as it did when it first came out. And I think being in the top 200 of all time is probably a bit generous. And I say this as someone who wants to introduce it to their 8-year-old in the near future as a next step up to get him more interested. So I really do like it. Now, the expansions, I not, again, speaking of expansions that didn't really pass the mustard, I think the original is still by far the best. Long Night just adds too much to it and complicates the beautiful simplicity of some of these mechanics. And the other expansion, the team one, it just doesn't work at all for me whatsoever. Played that and it was just a slog, too big, too long, too complicated, just did not work. Simplicity of the base game by far and away of itself. Great game, but it's going to fall, and I think it should probably fall further than where it is. I mean, I see this as a 300-400 personally. Again, saying as someone who has it literally right back over here out of sight and isn't thinking of getting rid of it anytime soon. So there you go. Last up, bonus one. I'm just going to rile some feathers. I'm going to do this one as a bonus one here. Descent, 2nd edition. 44th best thematic, 143rd overall. No. We're a decade out now from Descent, 2nd edition now. And I think nostalgia has kept it where it is, sort of like Hero Quest. I think both are vastly overrated. And I think both play on nostalgia at this point rather than the mechanics that have been outgrown and the innovation that we have seen in the dungeon crawl, both from a very much complicated side of things, but even from some of the simplicity that we've seen with things like Cthulhu Death May Die, or, you know, again, dare I say, Zombicides, the more 2.0 versions of Zombicides, but they have given us those scenarios-ish that you can play easily. You have the larger campaign games. You have the narrative adventure RPG campaign games. Everything from Sleeping Gods to Vagrant Song, which in my opinion have eclipsed this. Now, again, I'm not going to discount its impact on the hobby as a whole, but I just think it's, you know, it's a decade old and the design shows comparatively. And so for it to be as high as it is, still, I think this is more a testament of where things used to be rather than where things are truly at now. So there you go in a quick nutshell. So there you go. Those are my 5+1 overrated games on the Board Game Geek Top 200. See, told you, a little bit of what you expected, a little bit Legion of Games sideways spin on it. So I didn't have to include Terraforming Mars, Scythe, or Wingspan on it to make the list in the first place. Let me know what you think. What are games in the top 100 or 200 that you look at as overrated? You know, when I was scanning it earlier, it is heavy. Like heavy Euro, heavy aspects of those games. Those tend to be much more niche and they get a smaller crowd and they get an overall higher rating. And I think that inflates a few of theirs too, but I can't comment well enough on some of those. So I'll leave that for you guys in the comment section. Tell me what I'm right. Tell me what I'm wrong about. As always, just let me know what you think. Stay classy. Thanks for watching. Upcoming video as well. The inverse relationship of this one. 5 games in the top 200 that I think are still underrated. They aren't high enough. And why? So stay tuned in if you like that. Click the like button. Subscribe and share it with other people if you want. Liege goodness everywhere. Stay classy. See you around.